The dynamite went off 3 seconds too early, and Isaac Mercer never heard the screams that followed. One moment he was running toward the collapsed mine shaft entrance where 6 men had been working, and the next he was flat on his back in the dirt, staring up at the brilliant Colorado sky through a cloud of dust and debris. His mouth tasted like copper and earth. Someone was shaking his shoulder, their lips moving frantically, but all he could hear was a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from inside his own skull. He tried to sit up, tried to ask what happened, but his own voice sounded muffled and distant, like he was underwater. The foreman pulled him to his feet, gesturing wildly at the mine entrance where smoke still poured out in thick black plumes. Isaac stumbled forward, his boots kicking up dust he could not hear hitting the ground. Other miners rushed past him, their faces contorted in what he assumed were shouts, but the ringing in his ears drowned out everything except his own thundering heartbeat. It was September of 1884, and the Silver Bell mine outside Black Hawk, Colorado, had just become a tomb for 3 good men. Isaac knew this not because he heard the news, but because he watched them carry out the bodies over the next 2 hours while he sat on a wooden crate near the equipment shed, pressing his palms against his ears as if he could somehow push the sound back in. The mine doctor, a grizzled man named Patterson, examined him roughly, peering into his ears with a small light, pulling down his eyelids, asking questions Isaac could not hear. He tried to read the man's lips, but the words came too fast, tangled together in a blur of mustache and moving teeth. Finally, Patterson wrote something on a piece of paper and thrust it at him. The note said, "Blast damage, might be temporary, might not. Go home. Rest." Isaac walked the 1.5 miles back to Black Hawk in complete silence except for that infernal ringing. The main street was busy with afternoon traffic, wagons rolling past, horses neighing, miners heading to the saloons after their shifts, but he experienced it all as if watching through thick glass. A dog barked at him from a porch, its mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Children ran past, playing some game he could not hear. He felt like a ghost, separate from the living world, trapped in this bizarre prison of silence. By the time he reached his small, rented room above the general store, panic had started to set in. What if it never came back? What if this was his life now, cut off from everyone, unable to work, unable to hear a warning shout if danger came? He was 26 years old, and in one terrible instant, everything had changed. He did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the explosion again, felt the concussive force hit his chest, watched the world go silent. The ringing was worse in the dark, louder somehow, more insistent. When dawn finally came, he dragged himself out of bed and went downstairs to the general store, thinking he would try to explain to Mr. Henderson that he needed a few days before he could pay this month's rent. But when he opened the door, he found himself face to face with a young woman arranging bolts of fabric on a display table. She looked up at him with startled green eyes, and he realized with embarrassment that he must look terrible, his hair wild, his shirt rumpled, dirt still ground into his skin. She said something, her lips moving in what looked like a greeting. He shook his head, pointing to his ears, trying to pantomime what had happened. Confusion flickered across her face, then understanding. She held up one finger, telling him to wait, and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried a small notebook and a pencil. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat and looping, then turned the notebook toward him. The note read, "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" Something about those simple words, that uncomplicated offer of assistance, made his throat tight. He took the pencil from her hand, their fingers brushing briefly, and wrote back, "Mine accident yesterday. Cannot hear. Doctor says maybe temporary. She read his words, her brow furrowing with concern, then wrote again. I am Emma Zimmerman. My uncle owns this store. You live upstairs. He nodded, writing, Isaac Mercer. Yes, I work at Silver Bell Mine. Worked. Not sure what happens now. Emma looked at him for a long moment, those green eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. Then she wrote, You should sit down. You look exhausted. Let me bring you coffee. He wanted to refuse to maintain his pride, but the truth was he felt like he might fall over at any moment. So he nodded and let her guide him to a chair near the front window. She disappeared again and returned with a tin cup of coffee that was still hot enough to burn his tongue. He held it between his hands, grateful for the warmth, and watched her move around the store, dusting shelves, reorganizing merchandise, occasionally helping a customer. She glanced at him frequently, and each time their eyes met, she offered a small smile that made something in his chest loosen just slightly. When Mr. Henderson finally emerged from the back, Emma intercepted him before he could approach Isaac. She wrote something on her notebook and showed it to her uncle, who read it, then looked over at Isaac with sympathy rather than the irritation Isaac had been expecting. Henderson wrote his own note and handed it to Emma, who brought it to Isaac. The note said, Take the time you need. Rent can wait. Let us know if we can help. Isaac felt his eyes burn with gratitude. He wrote a quick thank you and stood to leave, but Emma caught his arm. She wrote quickly. Where are you going? He wrote back, to lie down. Maybe sleep, she wrote. Have you eaten? He had not, he realized. Had not eaten since breakfast the day before the explosion, before his world went quiet. He shook his head. Emma wrote, Wait here. She vanished into the back again and returned 15 minutes later with a wrapped bundle that smelled like bread and cheese. She pressed it into his hands along with a fresh note. Eat. Rest. Come back down if you need anything. I am here most days. He wanted to tell her she was kind. He wanted to tell her that her simple gestures meant more than she could know. But writing it all down felt too vulnerable, too exposed, so he just nodded and took the food upstairs. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing, then lay down on his bed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled him under. The next 3 days were the loneliest of Isaac's life. The ringing in his ears gradually faded from a sharp whine to a duller hum, but the silence remained absolute. He went to see Dr. Patterson again, and the doctor wrote him another note explaining that the blast had damaged something inside his ears, and that there was no way to know if his hearing would return. All they could do was wait. Isaac asked how long, and Patterson just shrugged, writing, Could be days, could be weeks, could be never, never. That word haunted him. He had always taken sound for granted, had never considered how much he relied on it, not just for safety and work, but for connection. Without hearing, he felt fundamentally isolated from everyone around him. People quickly lost patience with trying to communicate through gestures and written notes. Even his fellow miners, men he had worked alongside for 2 years, seemed awkward and uncomfortable around him now. They would clap him on the shoulder, their mouths shaping what he assumed were condolences, then hurry away, relieved to escape the burden of his disability. Only Emma Zimmerman seemed unfazed by it. On the second day, when he came downstairs to fetch water from the pump out back, she stopped him and handed him another note. How are you feeling? He wrote. Better. Still cannot hear anything, she wrote. Are you bored? Would you like something to read? He had not thought of reading, but the idea of having something to occupy his mind appealed to him. He nodded, and she disappeared into the store's small library section, returning with 3 books. One was a collection of short stories, another was a dime novel about cowboys, and the third was a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. He raised an eyebrow at the last one, and she wrote with what he imagined was a teasing tone. "You look like a man who might appreciate poetry." He did not, particularly, but he took all 3 books and spent the afternoon reading in his room, grateful for the distraction. That evening, Emma knocked on his door. He knew she had knocked only because he saw the door rattle slightly. When he opened it, she held out a plate covered with a cloth. Underneath was a hot meal, chicken and potatoes and green beans. She had also brought a fresh note. "My aunt made too much for dinner. She wanted to share." It was a kind lie. He knew the Hendersons did not live above the store, knew that Emma had probably cooked this herself or bought it from the boarding house down the street. But he accepted it with gratitude, writing, "Thank you." "You are very kind," she wrote back. "It is nothing. You need to eat." Then she hesitated, her pencil hovering over the paper before writing, "May I come in for a moment? I want to ask you something." He stepped back, suddenly conscious of how small and spare his room was. A bed, a trunk, a small table and chair, a wash basin on a stand, nothing on the walls. No personal touches. It was a room for sleeping, nothing more. Emma did not seem to judge it, though. She simply sat in the single chair and gestured for him to sit on the bed. Then she wrote, "I have been thinking about your situation. Writing notes every time we want to talk is slow. What if I teach you to read lips? And what if we develop some simple signs for common things?" Isaac stared at the note, surprised. He wrote, "Why would you do that?" She looked at him steadily as she wrote, "Because you should not have to be alone just because you cannot hear. And because I want to help." Something shifted in Isaac's chest at those words. He had been so focused on what he had lost that he had not considered what might still be possible. He wrote, "That would be very helpful. Thank you." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. She wrote, "We can start tomorrow if you like. I finish my work at the store around 5 o'clock. We could meet then." He agreed, and she left him to his dinner, which he ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling something like hope for the first time since the explosion. True to her word, Emma met him the next evening. They sat at the small table in his room, and she began by writing out the alphabet, then speaking each letter clearly, exaggerating her mouth movements so he could see how her lips and tongue formed each sound. It was harder than he expected. Many letters looked similar, and words that rhymed often looked identical on the lips. But Emma was patient, repeating things over and over, writing corrections and encouragements. They worked for an hour, and by the end, he could recognize a few simple words. Yes, no, hello, thank you, water, food. It was a start. They met every evening after that. Emma would finish her work at the store and come upstairs with her notebook and pencil, and they would sit together in the fading light, practicing. She taught him to watch not just her lips but her whole face, to notice how expressions and context could help him understand meaning. She taught him simple signs they invented together. A finger to the temple meant think, a hand over the heart meant feel, a gesture toward the door meant go. It was their own private language, and Isaac found himself looking forward to these sessions with an eagerness that had nothing to do with learning to communicate and everything to do with spending time with her. Emma was unlike any woman he had ever known. She was 23, had been raised in Denver by parents who believed in educating their daughter as thoroughly as their sons, and had come to Black Hawk to help her uncle after her aunt fell ill the previous year. She loved books, could talk for hours about stories and characters, and had opinions on everything from politics to poetry. She was also beautiful in a way that snuck up on him, not flashy or obvious, but steady and real. The way her hair escaped its pins by the end of the day. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating. The way her whole face lit up when she laughed, even though he could not hear the sound of it. By the end of the first week, Isaac could follow about half of what she said by reading her lips, especially if she spoke slowly and clearly. By the end of the second week, he could understand most of it, though he still missed things, still had to ask her to repeat or write things down. But the isolation that had felt so crushing before began to ease. He was no longer completely cut off from the world. He had a bridge back to it, and that bridge was Emma. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after the accident, Emma arrived at his door with an unusual expression on her face, something between excitement and nervousness. She did not wait to sit down before she started writing. "I have an idea. There is a dance at the community hall on Saturday night. Will you come with me?" Isaac stared at the words, his heart suddenly racing. A dance, where there would be music he could not hear, conversations he could not follow, crowds of people who would stare at him and whisper. His first instinct was to refuse, to stay hidden in his room where it was safe. But then he looked at Emma's face, at the hope and anticipation there, and he found himself nodding before he could think better of it. She smiled so brightly that he knew he had made the right choice, even if the idea terrified him. Saturday came too quickly. Isaac dressed in his best clothes, which were not very fine but were at least clean and pressed. He met Emma downstairs, and when she turned to greet him, his breath caught. She was wearing a deep blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes, her hair pinned up with small flowers woven through it. She was so lovely that for a moment he forgot to be nervous about the dance. She wrote him a quick note. "You look very handsome." He felt his face heat, and he wrote back, "You look beautiful." They walked to the community hall together, the evening air cool and pleasant. Isaac could see the glow of lanterns through the windows, could see people moving inside, couples dancing. When they entered, the noise of conversation hit him like a physical wall, except he could not hear any of it. He could only see mouths moving, bodies pressing close, the visual chaos of a crowded room. He felt Emma's hand slip into his, grounding him, and he squeezed it gratefully. She led him to the edge of the dance floor just as a new song started. He knew it was a new song because people began moving in a pattern he recognized as a waltz. Emma turned to him, raising her eyebrows in question. He shook his head, starting to write that he could not dance without hearing the music, but she stopped him. She placed his hand on her waist, took his other hand in hers, and then very deliberately began to move, slowly at first, showing him the rhythm with her body. He caught on after a moment, letting her lead, following the pattern of her steps rather than any music. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. He could feel the vibrations of the music through the floorboards, could use that to help keep time, but mostly he just watched Emma's face and tried not to step on her feet. She was patient with him, guiding him through the dance, smiling when he made mistakes, encouraging him with little nods and squeezes of his hand. By the second dance, he had found his rhythm, and by the third, he was actually enjoying himself. Emma wrote him a note during a break. "You are a better dancer than you think." He wrote back, "Only because you are a good teacher." They danced for hours, taking breaks to drink punch and rest their feet. Emma introduced him to some of her friends, young women who worked at the boarding house or the dress shop, and she smoothly interpreted for him when needed, either through writing quick notes or through the signs they had developed. Isaac noticed that she never made him feel like a burden, never acted embarrassed or frustrated by the extra effort required to include him. She simply accepted him as he was, and her friends followed her lead. Near the end of the evening, a slow song began. Isaac recognized it by the way couples moved closer together, swaying gently. Emma stepped into his arms without hesitation, and he held her carefully, aware of how close they were, how he could feel her breath against his collar, how perfectly she fit against him. They moved together in comfortable silence, and Isaac realized with sudden clarity that he was falling in love with her. Maybe had already fallen. The thought should have terrified him, should have made him pull away, but instead, he just held her a little closer and let himself feel it. When the dance ended and he walked her home, Emma wrote him a note before she went inside. "Thank you for coming tonight. I had a wonderful time." He wrote back, "So did I." "Thank you for asking me." She hesitated, then wrote, "Same time tomorrow for our lesson." He nodded, and she smiled before disappearing inside, leaving him standing on the dark street with his heart pounding and his head spinning and a happiness he had not felt in years. The next evening, their lesson felt different somehow, charged with something unspoken. Emma seemed more aware of him, and he was certainly more aware of her, of every accidental touch, every shared glance. They were working on more complex sentences, with Emma speaking and Isaac trying to follow, when she suddenly said something he could not quite catch. He asked her to repeat it, and she did, slower, but he still missed it. Frustrated, she picked up her pencil and wrote, "I said that I think you are very brave." He blinked, surprised. He wrote, "Brave? I am just trying to survive." She shook her head firmly and wrote, "You lost something terrible, and instead of giving up, you are learning to adapt. You came to a dance even though it scared you. You keep going. That is brave." He did not feel brave. He felt scared most of the time, worried about his future, about whether he would ever work again, about whether this silence was permanent. But the way Emma looked at him, the certainty in her expression, made him want to believe her. He wrote, "You make it easier." She read the words and something shifted in her expression. She wrote, "I am glad." Then, before he could second-guess it, Isaac reached out and took her hand. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, her eyes searching. He did not know what she was looking for, but whatever it was, she seemed to find it. She squeezed his hand and left it there, resting on the table between them, and they continued their lesson with their fingers intertwined. After that evening, something changed between them. They did not discuss it, did not label it, but it was there nonetheless. Emma started staying later during their lessons, and they spent less time practicing lip reading and more time just talking through notes and signs. She told him about her childhood in Denver, about her parents who had died in a cholera outbreak 2 years prior, about how she had come to Black Hawk to escape the memories and start fresh. He told her about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about losing his family's land to debt, about coming west to work in the mines, because it was the only job he could find that paid enough to live on. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms, both hated the taste of licorice, both dreamed of someday seeing the ocean. Emma confessed that she wrote poetry in a journal she kept hidden under her bed, and Isaac confessed that he used to sing in his church choir before his voice changed and became too rough. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of shared confidences and small intimacies. 4 weeks after the accident, Dr. Patterson called Isaac back for another examination. The doctor peered into his ears again, made some notes, then wrote, "No improvement. Damage looks permanent. I am sorry." Isaac read the words and felt something inside him break. He had been holding on to hope, had been telling himself that if he just waited long enough, his hearing would return. But now that hope was gone, replaced by the cold reality that this was his life now. Forever. He thanked the doctor numbly and walked out into the bright afternoon, feeling lost. He went straight to Emma. She was in the store helping a customer, but when she saw his face, she immediately excused herself and led him upstairs. She did not ask what happened. She just sat him down and waited. Finally, he picked up the pencil and wrote, "Doctor says my hearing is gone permanently. It is not coming back. Emma read the words, and her face filled with such sorrow and sympathy that Isaac felt his throat tighten. She wrote, "I am so sorry. I know you were hoping it would heal." He nodded, not trusting himself to respond. Emma hesitated, then reached out and pulled him into a hug. It was the first time they had embraced, and Isaac clung to her, his face buried in her shoulder, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and cotton. She held him tightly, one hand rubbing slow circles on his back, and even though he could not hear her, he felt her support like a tangible thing. When he finally pulled back, Emma wrote, "This does not change anything. You are still you. You will figure this out." He wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. He wrote, "How can I work? Who will hire a man who cannot hear warnings or instructions?" She wrote, "Then you find different work, or you learn to make the work you have accessible. You are smart and strong and capable. You will find a way." Her confidence in him was staggering, especially when he had none in himself. But Emma had been right about so many things already, had helped him more than he could ever repay. So he decided to trust her, to believe that somehow things would work out. Over the next week, Isaac went to every business in Black Hawk looking for work. He was honest about his disability, explaining through written notes that he could not hear but could do any job that did not require it. Most places turned him away immediately. A few were sympathetic but still said no. He tried the mines, the lumber mill, the freight companies, the saloons, the blacksmith, the livery stable. Every door closed in his face. He was running out of money and starting to panic when Emma came to him with another idea. She wrote, "My uncle needs help in the store. It is not glamorous, but it is work. Stocking shelves, moving inventory, helping with deliveries." What do you think? Isaac hesitated. He did not want to be a charity case, did not want Emma to pity him. But he also needed to eat, needed to pay rent, and he was out of options. He wrote, "Are you sure your uncle wants to hire me?" She wrote, "I already asked him. He said yes. As long as you are willing to work hard." Isaac was willing to work hard. He had always been willing to work hard. So he accepted, and the next morning he started his new job at Henderson's General Store. It was different from mining, less physically demanding but requiring more attention to detail. He learned where everything was kept, learned to read Mr. Henderson's handwriting when he wrote instructions, learned to anticipate what customers needed even when he could not hear them ask. Emma helped smooth over the awkward moments, interpreting when necessary, but encouraging customers to write their requests if they needed something specific. To Isaac's surprise, most people were kind about it. Once they understood his situation, they were patient, willing to point or gesture or scribble quick notes. A few were rude, treating him like he was stupid rather than deaf, but Emma always intervened swiftly, defending him with a fierceness that made his heart swell. Working in the store also meant seeing Emma every day, and Isaac was not sure if that was a blessing or a torture. A blessing because he loved being near her, loved catching her eye across the room and sharing a small smile, loved their continued evening lessons that had evolved into something more like companionship than education. A torture because he was becoming increasingly aware that his feelings for her had deepened into something serious, something he was not sure he had the right to act on. What did he have to offer her? He was a deaf man with a low-paying job and an uncertain future. She deserved someone whole, someone without complications. But Emma seemed to have different ideas. She found excuses to touch him, a hand on his arm to get his attention, a brush of fingers when she handed him something, a shoulder pressed against his when they sat close together in the evening. She looked at him with something warm and soft in her eyes, something that made his pulse race. And the notes she wrote became more personal, more revealing. One evening in late October, as they sat together in his room watching the sunset through the small window, Emma wrote, "Can I ask you something personal?" He nodded, curious and slightly nervous. She wrote, "Before the accident, were you courting anyone? Did you have a sweetheart?" The question surprised him. He wrote, "No, I was too focused on work, saving money." "Why do you ask?" She bit her lip, looking uncharacteristically uncertain, then wrote, "I was just wondering. I have been here almost a year and I have not met anyone who interested me. Until recently." Isaac's heart began to pound. He wrote, his hand slightly unsteady. Recently, Emma looked at him directly, her green eyes steady and clear. She wrote, "You interest me, Isaac Mercer, very much." He stared at the words, reading them over and over, hardly believing them. He wrote, "Emma, I am deaf. I work in a general store. I have nothing to offer you." She took the pencil back almost angrily and wrote in quick, firm strokes, "You have yourself to offer, and that is everything. You are kind and patient and thoughtful. You make me laugh. You listen to me, really listen, even without hearing. You see me. Do you know how rare that is?" He did not know what to say to that. His chest felt tight, his eyes burning. He wrote, "You are extraordinary. I think about you constantly, but I do not want you to feel obligated to me because you helped me." Emma shook her head firmly and wrote, "I do not feel obligated. I feel drawn to you. I care about you. If you do not feel the same, tell me and I will stop. But if you do feel the same, then please stop assuming you know what is best for me." Isaac looked at her, at the challenge and vulnerability mixed together in her expression, and something inside him surrendered. He wrote, "I feel the same. More than the same. I am falling in love with you, Emma. I think I have been for weeks." Emma's face transformed, lighting up with such joy that Isaac felt his breath catch. She grabbed the pencil and wrote, "I am falling in love with you too." Then, before he could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and brief, but it felt like everything shifting into place. When she pulled back, she was smiling, and Isaac found himself smiling too, wider than he had in months. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, longer this time, pouring all his feelings into it since he could not speak them aloud. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Emma wrote, "So we are courting now." Isaac wrote back, "If you will have me." She wrote, "I absolutely will have you." They spent the rest of the evening in his small room, talking through notes and kisses, making plans and promises. Emma wrote that she wanted to introduce him properly to her uncle and aunt, wanted everyone to know he was hers. Isaac wrote that he wanted to take her to dinner, wanted to court her properly even if everything about their courtship was unconventional. They both wanted a future together, even though neither was sure exactly what that future would look like. Over the next several weeks, Isaac and Emma became inseparable. They worked together during the day at the store, ate dinner together most evenings, spent their free time walking through Black Hawk or sitting on the bench outside the store, watching the town go by. Emma taught Isaac more advanced lip reading, and they continued to develop their personal sign language until they could have full conversations without writing anything down. Isaac met Emma's aunt and uncle formally, sitting down to dinner with them and explaining through notes his intentions toward Emma. Mr. Henderson was protective but fair, and Mrs. Henderson, who had recovered from her illness, was warm and welcoming. They gave Isaac their blessing, with the understanding that he would treat Emma with respect and care for her properly. The town slowly adjusted to seeing Isaac and Emma together. Some people gossiped, questioning whether it was appropriate for Emma to be courting a deaf man, but most were supportive or at least indifferent. The other store workers, a young man named Thomas and an older woman named Mrs. Petrie, became allies, helping to facilitate communication and covering for Emma when she wanted to slip away with Isaac for a few minutes. Winter came to Black Hawk, bringing snow and cold winds and shorter days. Isaac and Emma bundled up in coats and scarves and continued their walks anyway, their breath frosting in the air. On Christmas Eve, Isaac gave Emma a gift he had been saving for, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. She gave him a wool scarf she had knitted herself, and a note that said, "So you will be warm when I am not with you." They spent Christmas Day with the Hendersons, and for the first time since the accident, Isaac felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had a family again. In January of 1885, nearly 4 months after Isaac lost his hearing, Emma came to him with an unusual proposal. She wrote, "I have been thinking. We have developed our own signs, but did you know there is an actual sign language used by deaf people? I read about it in a magazine. It is called American Sign Language. If we could learn it, you could communicate with other deaf people too, not just me." Isaac was intrigued. He wrote, "Where would we learn it?" Emma wrote, "There is a school for the deaf in Colorado Springs." I sent them a letter asking for information. They wrote back and said they could send us some instructional materials, or we could visit for a few days and learn the basics directly. What do you think? It was a generous offer and a practical one. Isaac wrote, "That would be expensive. The trip, the lodging." Emma wrote, "I have been saving money, and this is important. What do you say?" Isaac could not argue with her logic or her determination. So in early February, they took the train to Colorado Springs, a journey of several hours through snow-covered mountains and valleys. It was Emma's first time leaving Black Hawk since she arrived, and Isaac's first time traveling since he lost his hearing. The train was disorienting without sound, the vibrations and motion strange and disconnected. But Emma held his hand the entire time and pointed out interesting sights through the window. The Colorado School for the Deaf was a large, impressive building on the outskirts of Colorado Springs. They were greeted by a teacher named Miss Alice Brennan, a middle-aged woman who was herself deaf. Miss Brennan communicated entirely through sign language, and she had an interpreter with her, a young woman who voiced what Miss Brennan signed and signed what others spoke. Over the next 3 days, Miss Brennan taught Isaac and Emma the basics of American Sign Language. It was more complex and nuanced than the simple signs they had invented, with grammar and syntax rules that took time to learn. But it was also beautiful, expressive, and efficient. Isaac felt like he was learning a new language, which he supposed he was. Miss Brennan told them through her interpreter that many deaf people lived full, happy lives using sign language, that deafness was not a tragedy, but simply a different way of experiencing the world. Those words changed something fundamental in how Isaac saw himself. He had spent months viewing his deafness as a loss, a disability, something that made him less than whole. But Miss Brennan showed him a different perspective. That being deaf was just another way of being human, with its own culture and language and community. It did not make him broken. It just made him different. When they returned to Black Hawk, Isaac and Emma practiced their new sign language skills constantly. Emma convinced her uncle to let them hold a small class at the store one evening a week, teaching basic signs to anyone interested. To their surprise, several people showed up, including some of Isaac's former co-workers from the mine who wanted to be able to communicate with him properly. The class became a regular event, and slowly, Black Hawk became a more accessible place for Isaac. Spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the mountains green. Isaac had been working at the store for 6 months now and had proven himself reliable and hardworking. Mr. Henderson gave him a raise and more responsibilities, putting him in charge of inventory management. Emma continued to work alongside him, and their relationship deepened into something solid and enduring. They knew each other's habits and quirks, knew how to comfort each other on bad days and celebrate good ones, knew how to communicate even when words, spoken or signed, were not enough. On a warm evening in April, Isaac took Emma for a walk up to a ridge overlooking Black Hawk. The town sprawled below them, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk fell. He had been planning this for weeks, had been carrying the ring in his pocket for days waiting for the right moment. Now, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, with Emma's hand in his and her eyes reflecting the dying light, he knew the moment had come. He pulled out his notebook and wrote carefully, "Emma Zimmerman, you saved me. Not just by helping me communicate, but by seeing me as more than my disability. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You made me laugh when I wanted to give up. You made me feel whole again. I love you more than I can express with words or signs. Will you marry me?" Emma read the note, and tears immediately filled her eyes. She looked at Isaac, then at the ring he pulled from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond he had spent months saving for. She took the pencil with a shaking hand and wrote, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed there on the ridge as the sun set and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built their own language of love when the conventional one failed them. They were married in June of 1885 in a small ceremony at the Black Hawk Community Hall. Emma wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, and Isaac wore a new suit that Mr. Henderson had helped him pick out. The ceremony was conducted both verbally and in sign language, with a minister who spoke and Miss Alice Brennan, who had traveled from Colorado Springs specifically for the wedding, signing simultaneously. It was important to both Isaac and Emma that their wedding be accessible, that it honor both the hearing and deaf communities they were now part of. The reception was held in the same hall where they had danced together for the first time, and Emma made sure there was music for those who could hear it, and plenty of visual elements for those who could not. People danced and ate and celebrated, and Isaac felt surrounded by genuine affection and support. His former mining colleagues were there, signing their congratulations. Emma's friends from town were there, tearfully happy. The Hendersons were there, beaming with pride. Even Dr. Patterson was there, writing Isaac a note that said, "You have done well for yourself. I'm glad to see it." When Isaac and Emma finally left the reception, they went to their new home, a small house on the edge of town that they had been fixing up for the past month. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. They had painted the walls, built furniture, planted a garden. It was a space they had created together, and walking into it as husband and wife felt like coming home. That first night, lying in bed with Emma in his arms, Isaac felt a contentment he had never experienced before. His life had not turned out the way he expected. He was not a miner anymore, not the man he had planned to be. But he was happy, genuinely happy, and that was worth more than any plan. Emma had fallen asleep, her breathing even and peaceful against his chest. Isaac watched her in the moonlight streaming through the window, memorizing the curve of her face, the way her hand rested on his heart. He thought about the explosion that had stolen his hearing 9 months ago, about how terrifying and devastating it had been. He thought about how he had believed his life was over, that he had nothing left to offer the world. And then he thought about Emma, about her kindness and patience, about the notes she had written him when he could not hear, about the language they had built together. She had not just helped him adapt to his deafness. She had shown him that his worth was not determined by what he could or could not do, but by who he was as a person. She had loved him not despite his disability, but including it, seeing it as just one part of a whole person. Isaac knew that challenges still lay ahead. Being deaf in a hearing world was not easy, and there would be frustrations and obstacles he could not yet anticipate. But with Emma beside him, he felt ready to face whatever came. They would handle it together, the way they handled everything, with communication and patience and love. The years that followed were good ones. Isaac continued to work at Henderson's general store, eventually becoming a full partner when Mr. Henderson decided to semi-retire. Emma kept working alongside him, managing the books and the ordering while Isaac handled inventory and deliveries. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. Their sign language classes continued to grow, and Black Hawk slowly became known as one of the most accessible towns in Colorado for deaf individuals. Several deaf people moved to the area specifically because they had heard about the welcoming community, and a small but vibrant deaf population developed. Isaac found himself becoming an advocate, working with business owners and town officials to make Black Hawk more inclusive. He pushed for visual warning systems in the mines, for written notices to be posted in public places, for at least one person in every business to learn basic sign language. Emma became involved in advocacy work as well, particularly around education. She worked with the local school to ensure that if any deaf children enrolled, they would have access to appropriate resources. She wrote articles for the Denver newspapers about the importance of accessibility and the capabilities of deaf individuals. She became something of a local celebrity, known for her passion and eloquence. In the spring of 1887, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and a little terror. They spent months preparing, reading everything they could about babies and parenting. Emma worried about how they would know when the baby cried if Isaac could not hear it. Isaac worried about whether he would be able to protect his child if he could not hear danger approaching. But they worked through their fears together, problem-solving and planning. Their son was born in December of 1887, a healthy boy with Emma's green eyes and Isaac's dark hair. They named him Henry. Isaac held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. He could not hear Henry's first cry, but he could feel the vibrations of it against his chest, could see the emotion on Emma's exhausted, radiant face. They developed systems to manage the challenges of parenting while deaf. Emma attached bells to Henry's cradle that Isaac could see moving even if he could not hear them. They took turns with night feedings, with Emma handling the times when hearing Henry fuss was important, and Isaac taking the times when just being present was enough. As Henry grew, he learned both English and sign language, becoming fluent in both before he could even walk properly. He was their little interpreter, their bridge between two worlds. In 1890, their second child arrived, a daughter they named Sarah. She was quieter than Henry, more contemplative, and she took to sign language even more naturally than her brother. By the time Sarah was 2, she preferred signing to speaking, much to Emma's amusement. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The store prospered, the children grew, and Isaac and Emma's love deepened with each passing year. They still communicated through a combination of sign language, lip reading, and occasional written notes when precision was necessary. They still found new ways to surprise and delight each other, still laughed together, still supported each other through difficulties. Isaac never regained his hearing. The silence became his normal, and he stopped thinking of it as a loss and started thinking of it simply as his reality. He did not spend time mourning what might have been. Instead, he focused on what was: a beautiful wife who loved him, 2 healthy children who brought him joy every day, meaningful work, good friends, a community that had learned to include him. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Emma gave Isaac a gift that made him cry. It was a leather-bound book, and inside, she had copied every note she had ever written him, starting from that very first day in the store when she had asked if he needed help. Hundreds of notes, preserved and organized chronologically, a record of their courtship and marriage told through fragments of written conversation. On the first page, she had written a new note. These are the words that built our love. Every question, every answer, every small moment of connection. I saved them all because they matter, because you matter, because what we have built together is extraordinary. I love you, Isaac Mercer. I will love you always. Isaac held the book carefully, paging through it, remembering each note and the context in which it was written. He saw their entire relationship laid out before him, from those early tentative attempts at communication to the deep, comfortable intimacy they shared now. He looked up at Emma, who was watching him with those same green eyes that had first captured his attention 11 years ago, and he sighed. You are everything to me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me that my life was not over when I thought it was. You gave me everything. Emma signed back. You gave me everything too. We gave each other everything. And it was true. They had both come to Black Hawk broken in different ways, Emma grieving her parents and seeking a fresh start, Isaac literally shattered by the mine explosion. But they had found each other in that brokenness, had helped each other heal, had built something beautiful and lasting from the pieces. As the years continued to pass, Isaac and Emma grew old together. Henry became a teacher, specifically focusing on deaf education, inspired by his father's experiences and his mother's advocacy. Sarah became a writer, publishing novels and essays, many of which featured deaf characters and explored themes of communication and accessibility. Both children married and had families of their own, giving Isaac and Emma a house full of grandchildren who all learned sign language as naturally as speaking. The store eventually passed to Henry's eldest daughter, who ran it with the same integrity and inclusivity that Isaac and Emma had established. Black Hawk continued to be a place where deaf people were welcomed and included, a legacy that Isaac and Emma were both proud of. In 1915, when Isaac was 57 years old, he and Emma sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both gray now, their faces lined with age, their hands gnarled from decades of work. But they still held hands the way they had when they were young, still found comfort in each other's presence. Emma had a notebook on her lap and she wrote, "Do you remember the day we met? When you came downstairs after the explosion and I wrote you that first note?" Isaac nodded, signing. "I remember everything about that day. I was so lost, and you helped me find my way," Emma wrote. "I did not know it then, but that was the day my real life started. Everything before was just preparation for finding you." Isaac took the pencil and wrote, "I used to think losing my hearing was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But if I had not lost it, I would not have needed your help. We might never have really met. So in a strange way, that explosion gave me everything I have now. It gave me you." Emma read his words and smiled, that same smile that had been comforting him for more than 30 years. She wrote, "I love you, Isaac Mercer." He wrote back, "I love you, Emma Mercer." They sat together as the light faded, comfortable in their silence, needing no words or signs to communicate what they felt. After more than 3 decades together, they had long since learned to read each other's thoughts, to anticipate each other's needs, to exist in that deep, wordless understanding that comes only from a lifetime of love. Isaac thought about the young man he had been, terrified and alone after the explosion, convinced his life was over. He thought about Emma's patience and kindness, about the notes she had written, about the bridge she had built for him back to the world. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the community they had helped shape, about the decades of happiness they had shared. The blast had left his ears ringing and silent, but Emma had given him a different kind of voice. She had shown him that communication was about more than sound, that love could be expressed in countless ways, that disability did not mean inability. She had written him notes until he could hear again, not with his ears but with his heart. And in the end, that was the only kind of hearing that truly mattered. They remained on that porch until the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a language of love that transcended sound, who had proven that the strongest connections are not heard but felt. Isaac squeezed Emma's hand and she squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they needed to say. I see you. I know you. I love you. I choose you. Today and always. The story of their love would be passed down through generations, told and retold by their descendants. It would become a family legend, a testament to the power of patience and perseverance, and seeing people for who they truly are. Children would grow up hearing about the explosion that took their great-grandfather's hearing, about the notes their great-grandmother wrote, about the language of signs and looks and touches they developed together. And those children would learn that love is not limited by the ways we can communicate, but expanded by the lengths we will go to understand each other. Years later, after both Isaac and Emma had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their family would gather to go through their belongings. They would find that leather-bound book of notes, preserved carefully, the pages yellowed but the words still clear. They would read through those notes, those fragments of conversation, and they would see a love story unfold in handwriting and ink. They would see two people learning to speak to each other, to understand each other, to love each other despite every obstacle. And they would understand that some love stories are not told in grand gestures or passionate declarations. Some are told in small, patient moments, in notes passed across a table, in signs made in lamplight, in the decision to keep trying, keep connecting, keep loving even when it would be easier to give up. That was Isaac and Emma's legacy. Not just their children and grandchildren, not just the accessible community they helped build, but the fundamental truth they proved through their lives together. That love adapts, that communication takes many forms, that the deepest connections are forged not in perfection, but in the willingness to meet each other where you are and build bridges across whatever divides you. The blast had left Isaac's ears ringing and silent, but Emma had written him notes until he could hear again. And what he heard in the end was the sound of love, patient and persistent and true. It was a sound that needed no ears to perceive, no voice to speak. It was a sound that lived in the heart, and it would echo through generations. A reminder that the most important things in life are not heard but felt, not spoken but shown, not planned but built together, day by day, word by word, note by note, until something beautiful emerges from what once seemed broken. And that, in the end, was everything.